Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my July wrap up for you guys. So this video is going to be reviews for the last 7 books I read in the month of July. As with most months, I have already posted a mid-month wrap-up. So if you would like to see reviews for any of this stack of books, which is The Start of Me and You by Emery Lord, The Farthest Shore by Ursula K. Le Guin, Children of the Whales Volume 5 by Abby Umeda, The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, Stop in the Name of Pants by Louise Renison, and also A Sacrifice in the Smoke by Jessie Elliott and KJ Sutton, then I will link my mid-month wrap-up up here for you guys to check out. So the month of July was pretty damn good reading wise. I managed to read 14 books in total, which is more books than I have managed to read in a single month throughout the entirety of 2020 so far. However, it wasn't quite my best reading month of the year. My best reading month was April, where I read 4,500 pages. This month I read around 4,200, so not quite my best reading month ever, but I did a really good job. It's not often that I go over 4,000 pages. That being said, I do kind of have my own readathon, which was the 48-hour bookathon, and also the reading rush to thank for that, because without those readathons I definitely would not have read so much, and I also would not have picked up some of the books that I did actually read in July. So getting into my stats for the month, in the month of July I read a total of 4,239 pages, and this breaks down to an average of 137 pages per day. For the star ratings, we had 3 3 stars, 9 4 stars, and 2 5 stars, which breaks down to an average of a 3.9 rating per book. The amount of 4 stars I had this month was astronomical. Like, we got to a point in the month where there was only one book that I had rated anything other than 4 stars. Throughout the end of the month we got a little bit of variety in there, but essentially the running theme for this month was that I really enjoyed the majority of the books that I read, but there wasn't a lot that was like way up there that I really loved. For the demographics, I read 7 young adult books, 2 new adult, and 5 adult. For the formats, we had 8 standardly formatted novels, 3 manga, 2 audiobooks, and 1 ebook. For the genres, we had quite a range. I read 6 fantasy books, 4 contemporaries, 1 horror, 1 paranormal, 1 science fiction, and 1 thriller. And finally, for the places where I sourced these books from, 9 of them came from my own TBR that existed prior to the start of 2020, and 5 of them were books I have hauled in 2020. So getting into the reviews, the first book that I finished in the second half of July was City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This was a buddy read with Starla from Starla Reads. I had a great experience buddy reading this with Starla, but this is an adult fantasy that is full of Egyptian and Muslim folklore, and it follows a girl called Nari. She is a con artist and she has built her trade on diagnosing people. Now, she does actually have the power to diagnose people, but what she does is if she senses that somebody rich has come to see her and there is nothing wrong with them, she will lie and say that they are very sick so that they go and purchase supplies from her friend who runs an apothecary, and she then gets a cut of the money that they spend. Now, one day Nari is performing this ritual that is kind of like an exorcism, and she accidentally releases a genie, and the genie tells her that she's actually half jinn and takes her to the City of Brass. So this book is told in 2 perspectives. We follow Nari and we also follow Ali. So Nari's perspective, she is with Dara and they are heading towards the City of Brass, and in that we have a lot of world building, a lot of the history of the jinn and things like that. Now, Ali is one of the princes of the City of Brass, so his perspective takes place in the City of Brass. So from him we learn about the City of Brass and all about its politics, as there is kind of a rebel uprising going on, as the citizens of the City of Brass who are half jinn are treated as inferior to full-blooded jinn, and that is causing a lot of conflict in the city. So I gave this one 4 stars overall. I did really enjoy it. I love the setting of the City of Brass. It is a beautiful landscape to start off with, and I think that the way that S.A. Chakraborty built this world, it was very atmospheric. I also really enjoyed how the 2 perspectives related to each other, because even though they are very geographically distant for the majority of this book, they did tie very closely together. So in Nari's perspective, she would be learning about the history of the City of Brass through Dara, and in Ali's perspective you would be getting the present day situation. So Dara participated in a war that was hundreds and hundreds of years ago, so you get his opinion and perspective on what things were like at that time, when he did the things that he did, and with Ali you would see what is happening in present day that relates to to that and how what happened hundreds of years ago has manifested and evolved into what is going on in the city today. Plot-wise, I thought that it was very complex, very well plotted. This book is kind of a slow burn and it very much feels like a setup book. However, I did find it riveting and I didn't think that it read slow, even though the plot moves quite slowly. The only negative point I have towards it is the romantic element. Now, I can definitely read a fantasy story that has romance in it that isn't well developed. I kind of just overlook it because the fantasy plot line is often the central point and the romance is just kind of thrown in there. However, in the City of Brass, there are a lot of character motivations and a lot of plot points that do rest on the romance, and I didn't find the romance to be especially well developed. I didn't find it to be especially compelling, and you guys know that I love me a romance, so for me to say that, it is quite likely not very well done. I did warm to the romance. There was a very angsty moment between the two characters that I really loved, and I think that now that the romance is established, anything that continues in the next two books I will definitely enjoy a lot more, because we won't have this, not even insta love, because it's kind of, it wasn't slow burn at all, but it did kind of take a while to happen but then developed quite quickly, and I just felt like there was nothing behind this romance aside from just a mutual attraction, and I like things to be a little bit slower, I guess, so I can really feel the chemistry between the two characters. But overall, would definitely recommend this book and I'm very excited to continue the series. Now we're into my reading rush stack. So the first thing I did during the reading rush was complete Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden. This is the final book in the Winter Night trilogy, and once again I gave this one 4 stars. So I really love the Winter Night trilogy. It's an adult fantasy series that is heavily inspired by Russian folklore. We follow Vasilisa, who at the beginning of the series is a very young girl in this northern Russian town, and she can see the spirits of the household and the spirits of the forest, and she is what is known as sighted. Now everything begins to change in this story when her father remarries and brings a very devout woman into the household who is also sighted but considers these spirits to be demons. So this woman brings a priest with her, and the priest starts to convert the people of the town away from the old gods and the spirits of the forest and towards Christianity, which results in the spirits not receiving tribute, meaning that the people of the town are now open to attack from malevolent spirits. Each book has a very different setting. The first book very much focuses on the magic and is a very slow atmospheric coming of age story. The second book focuses a lot on the politics of the world, because aside from all the magic, this series does take place on the backdrop of the war between Russia and the Mongolian Empire, which did actually happen. I think it's around the 1400s, although I can't remember for sure right now, and history is definitely not my strong point. So the second book definitely focuses on the politics and this war between the Mongolian Empire and Russia, and then the third book is a little bit of both, but my issue with the third book was the structure mainly. I feel like this last book did try to do too much. There is a very emotionally impactful event that happens right at the beginning of this book that I just felt like I didn't really feel, and I do think it should have happened at the end of the second book, because the first section of this book, and it's only around the first 50 pages, does take place directly after the events of the second book. From there we move on to a little bit of a setting, and it focuses on the magical plot line, and then it kind of wraps all of that up and then comes back around to the politics. Now that being said, I did really love the conclusion of this series. It did almost make me cry in a number of places. I absolutely love the characters in here. I love Morozko, I love Vasilisa, but then some of the things that happened with their plot lines, where their plot lines merge in this book, I wasn't really feeling. I felt a little bit iffy about the plot in the second 2 books in this series anyway. Some things kind of happen and I just question, I'm like, why does this have to happen right now? It doesn't seem quite logical, but in a way that I can't quite put my finger on. But I do still really love Catherine Arden's writing, even though I would say it is weakest in this book. I really love the setting and the atmosphere in here. It has a romance storyline that I did not expect going into this series that I absolutely love. I loved learning about Russian folklore and the individual spirits and how they all perform a certain task, and how this task is related to things like nature and the way that the world works naturally. So I would still 100% recommend this series. It's just, to me, The Winter of the Witch was definitely the weakest in the series, and I'm a little bit disappointed on that front, but this is still a series that I very much love. Next up, I read my last 4-star of the month, so my streak of 4 stars did finally come to an end, and that was Dreaming Sun by Ichigo Takano. This is a young adult manga by the author / artist of Orange, which is currently, I would say, my favorite manga that I've read, and I wanted to pick this up even though I knew that it would be very different from Orange, just because I love Orange so much. I've discovered that I really love contemporary manga as opposed to fantasy, and this one was definitely definitely no exception. So this follows a young girl, and her mother died quite a while ago now, and her father remarried also a while ago, but they now have a new baby, and the main character feels very pushed out of her family. So she decides that she's going to run away from home, and when she has decided this, she comes across a guy passed out in the park, and he's drunk, and he wakes up and says that he will give her a place to stay if she completes 3 tasks for him. The first one is that she has to tell him why she's run away. The second is that she has to find his missing house key, and the third is that she has to have a dream and fall in love. So she completes the first 2 of these tasks very quickly and ends up moving into this apartment where this guy who is referred to as the landlord lives, as well as 2 teenage boys, and one of the teenage boys she instantly falls in love with, and it's kind of in the same vein as Orange, where she instantly falls in love with this guy, and instead of telling him how she feels, she's just like really depreciating towards herself and decides that she could never be good enough for him, even though he seems like a pretty stand-up guy. So when I posted my reading rush vlog where I read this, Ashley from Frolic Through Fiction messaged me and said, why does this manga sound like New Girl in manga form? And to be honest, it is New Girl in manga form. It's young adult, so not quite New Girl, but we definitely have that vibe of a girl moving into this house where 3 guys already live and they already have a relationship. There's a lot of banter between them, they make fun of each other a lot, and they all have different personalities. I just thought that this was really cute. I mean, the thing with manga is that it isn't always realistic. For example, a young teenage girl walking into a park, finding this 20-something-year-old guy passed out, and he says, hey, come live with me, and she accepts it and everything is safe and dandy. Like, that just doesn't happen in real life, but in manga things like that do happen quite frequently. But I just found it to be so cute, and I really love all of the characters. Art style wise, this is very reminiscent of Orange as well. I mean, it has the same illustrator, so it's going to be, but the main character and the love interest do look a lot like Naho and her love interest in Orange, but art style wise they are drawn in pretty much the exact same way, and the main character is a lot like Naho in personality. But this is classed as like a contemporary comedy manga, and I did think it was funny. A lot of the dialogue in manga does tend to be quite blunt, and I did chuckle quite a few times while I was reading this, and I'm definitely really excited to continue with this series now because I just had a great time reading it. Even though I don't read a lot of contemporary, especially young adult contemporary, and even though I generally am not interested in stories unless they have a unique element or a fantasy element in them, I do absolutely adore young adult manga. It's my kind of wholesome comfort read, if you will, and I think that this is going to be a series that I really love. So moving on to my favorite book of July, we have A Strange Hymn by Laura Thalassa. This is a new adult fantasy romance, and it is the 2nd book in the Bargainer series, which is a series that I'm really loving at the moment. So the main character of this book is Callie. Callie is a siren, and she has a string of black beads up her arm. She has 322 beads, and each one represents a debt that she owes to the Bargainer. This book is told in 2 timelines. We have the present day timeline set in the human world, and we also have a timeline that is 7 years previous to the main events of this book, also in the human world when Callie is much younger. So the first book starts off in the past timeline where Callie has just murdered her stepfather, who was sexually abusing her. So trigger warnings for sexual assault and also the long-lasting trauma associated with that in this series. But Callie's stepfather was a very influential man in the supernatural world. So Callie calls in the Bargainer, who is this big, dark, brooding, handsome fairy male who is notorious for offering people bargains, and she asks him to help cover up the death of her stepfather. So he agrees to do this, and the past timeline continues to chronicle their interactions over the next couple of years, up until a point where the Bargainer left and never returned. He's been missing for 7 years, and the present day timeline starts off where he has just arrived and has decided that he now wants to claim back all of the debts that Callie owes him. So this series has like mad A Court of Mist and Fury vibes, like mad Rhysand vibes, and I would definitely say that the Bargainer is a step up above Rhysand. So if you like Rhysand, I think you would really love the Bargainer. He's like Rhys in a lot of ways. He's a fey king, he has a massive wingspan, he's brooding, he's mysterious, he has like dark nighttime shadowy magic, and he also has the lethalness that Rhysand has. However, the key difference between Rhys and the Bargainer is that Rhys's dark side is very much a front, and the Bargainer, Desmond Flynn, is actually pretty damn ruthless. Like, he is a dangerous guy to be around. So essentially Desmond Flynn just really makes this series for me. The only kind of downside to it is that it's a little bit predictable. I'm not normally like 10 steps ahead on the plot than anybody else. So at the end of the first book, I kind of gathered that something was going on with the plot, and it's only confirmed like halfway through the second book. So I do think that there is a lot of predictability in here. The characters are very slow to catch on to what's going on. However, I still gave this 5 stars because that doesn't actually detract away from my enjoyment. The first book is very much centered on the romance. We have a lot more plot and a lot more of the fantasy world in the second book. There is pretty much a tour of one of the areas of the fairy world in this book. We meet some more of the influential fairies in here and also learn a lot more about the politics, but the romance is still very much there. Would also recommend this series for top-notch smut. Like, I can't lie, the smut in here is definitely spot on. So if you guys trust my recommendations on fantasy romance, if you're a fan of Sarah J Maas, if you read Fortuna Sworn on my recommendation, then I would highly recommend you pick up this series because it is next level. It's really damn good. My second 5-star read of the month was Vicious by V. Schwab, which I buddy read with Jade from JD Ray Reads. We have just started buddy reading all of V. Schwab's books, where Jade has already read most of them because V. Schwab is her favorite author, and I have only read the first 2 books in the Shades of Magic series and now Vicious. So this is an adult science fiction story that follows 2 characters, Victor and Eli. Victor and Eli were best friends in college, and they were working together on a project to create extraordinaries, which is essentially people with superpowers. Victor and Eli do actually manage to find out how to create extraordinaries, and it is through near-death experiences. So they then kill themselves and each other to gain these powers. Now this book is told in 2 timelines. So we have the past timeline where all of this is going on. Victor and Eli are friends and they're trying to do this. And then we have the present day timeline, which is 10 years in the future, where Victor has just got out of jail, where he's been for the last 10 years, and he now has a score to settle with Eli because they are mortal enemies. So this one only just came in at 5 stars. The reason for that is that I feel like I lacked an emotional connection to this. V. Schwab's writing as well is not really for me. I do think that there is a disconnect between the darkness of the majority of her books and her writing style, which is quite simplistic. And I do find it really odd because her writing style is quite simplistic, but I do struggle to get into her books for the first 50 to 100 pages while I'm just growing accustomed to her writing style. However, aside from that, I really love the characters, the plot, and the world in this book. I love Victor and Eli so much. The reason that I was drawn to this series is that I love bad characters and I also love grey morality, and you definitely get a lot of that in here. My only kind of issue with the morality in here is that I kind of wish that they were worse, especially one of them, because this book is marketed as being like you're following the villains in the story, and one of them is definitely much more villainous than the other. So I kind of wish that the other one was also on that level, so that you're kind of torn about which one is your favorite, as opposed to one of them very clear-cut being the better of the 2, if that makes sense, and the one that you're more likely to root for. That being said, I still really enjoyed both of their characters. I enjoyed seeing them turn from relatively normal 20-something-year-old men into these twisted villainous characters. I enjoyed also watching the motivations develop, because Victor, straight from the beginning, you know that his driving motivation throughout all of this and how he becomes a villain is because he is so bitter and jealous and he wants to be the best at everything. And while Victor is really good at the majority of the things that he tries, Eli is also very naturally good at everything he tries, and a lot of the time he just pips Victor to the post. So throughout the beginning of this book, we see Victor see Eli accomplish and be jealous and want to pull Eli back so that he can be on top. And then Eli's motivations are, I don't want to say more complex, but they do come as a little bit of a surprise. It took a turn that I wasn't expecting it to, but I do like how Eli got from where he was at the beginning, where he seemed like a genuinely nice guy, to how it ends up at the end. I also really enjoyed the ending of this and the way everything came together and the way some of the characters played each other. I like how we had a balanced side in the present day timeline, because we have Victor on one side with a young girl called Sydney, and then on the other side we have Eli with a girl called Serena, and it is this mix of extremely powerful people against each other. We do also have Mitch as well. Like, somebody called me out on forgetting Mitch in my vlog. We have Mitch on the Sydney and Victor side. However, Mitch isn't an extraordinary, though he is extremely good at what he does do. But yeah, really enjoyed this book, really excited to be reading Vengeful in July. I've heard it isn't as good, but a lot of people read this as a standalone, not expecting there to be a sequel, and I feel like because I already knew there was going to be a sequel going into this, I'm going to be a little bit more open-minded about Vengeful, and I may end up enjoying it a little bit more. I then picked up Children of the Whales Volume 6 by Abby Umeda. I did read Volume 5 earlier in the month. It's in my mid-month wrap-up, so I don't really want to dwell on this one too much, but this is an older teen fantasy manga series that follows a 14-year-old boy called Chakuro, who is the archivist on the Mud Whale, and the Mud Whale is this floating island on the sea of sand. All of the residents of the Mud Whale have never seen a human from outside of their community, and one day they float past this island, they go out to scout it for supplies, and they find the first ever human that any of them have ever seen that wasn't born and raised on the Mud Whale. So this obviously throws the world wide open. This person has outside knowledge, and the residents of the Mud Whale start to discover about who they are, why they're there, who put them there, what this means, what exactly the Mud Whale is, and all of this stuff. So volume 6 I gave 3 stars. I find the pacing to be very up and down in this series. So you will have volumes that are full of action, and then you will have a volume like this where not a lot really happens. This one kind of had a couple of short stories in it. Like, one of the issues included in here, there's 4 issues per volume, and on one of the issues they passed this big tower called the Tower of Time. A couple of them went out to visit it, and they met a man there who was climbing the Tower of Time for whatever reason. It was about his story and the place that he was from and what happened to the place that he's from, and as far as I can tell, aside from giving the characters something to reflect on, that story had no real purpose aside from being just like further exploration of the outside world. It was a little bit like that. The characters are en route from the place that they were to the place that they've decided that they're now going to go. They made the decision that they were going to travel at the end of the last volume, and they haven't arrived there in this volume. So yeah, not a whole ton happened. It was one of the more slow-paced volumes in this series, so I gave it 3 stars, but I do still enjoy this series and I will be continuing. And then the final book that I read in July was one that I have very mixed feelings about, and that was Good Me Bad Me by Ali Land. This is an adult thriller that follows a teenage girl, and she is the daughter of a serial killer. So she made the decision to report her mother to the police, and her mother was arrested. Now, this girl is 15 and she's been put into a foster family. She's going to a new school. She's been given a new name, all for her own protection, on a different side of the country. And this book takes place from when she's just been placed into this new family, where the father is, I think he's a psychologist, and it is about the run-up to her mother's trial, and he is kind of preparing her because she will have to stand witness and things like that. I gave this one 3 stars. I didn't really like it, but I do think that it's good. So that's what I mean when I say I have mixed feelings. One of the reasons that I didn't like this is the writing style. It's kind of the inner monologue of this main character, so she's not really disclosing anything to the reader. It's not really telling a story as such, aside from the fact that the story is happening as she's just existing and thinking. And the way that it was written, so like for some speech there wouldn't be quotation marks, and personally it's just not a style of writing that I particularly like. Now, the focus of this story, I mean, it has a very vague synopsis, but the focus of this story is the main character's psyche and the effects that the trauma of her childhood growing up with this serial killer, where she has not only had to witness atrocious acts but also been the victim of atrocious acts, and how this childhood of trauma is currently affecting her. Throughout this book, she is frequently triggered by various things. She has been prescribed medication, she's not taking it, and I would say that this overall is a character study on how a person in this position may think, feel and act after having lived through what this main character has lived through. So it's very, very slow moving because it is very character driven, which is not what I personally like from a thriller. I don't really know the types of thrillers, because I know you have like psychological, domestic, but I don't know how to identify what is what. I would assume that this is a psychological thriller. I did like it from the point of being fascinated of this character study of what would somebody in this situation behave like, but in terms of a book, in terms of it being entertaining, it just wasn't really for me. The author of this book, I found out when I got to the end on the inside cover, was actually a mental health professional. She is a full-time author now, but she spent 10 years working as a child and adolescent mental health nurse. So I would say that she knows what she's talking about in this book. I cannot speak on the representation in here, so I'm going with the assumption that somebody who is a trained mental health professional and has worked with children and adolescents would know what she's talking about. There is a plot twist in here. I did kind of not necessarily find it predictable, but I wasn't surprised by the plot twist based on the 300 pages that I had of being in this character's mind. But yeah, it doesn't paint mental health in a positive light, but I do think it has like a kind of neutrality of this character is behaving like this, she's thinking like this, and you think, well, this makes sense because of this thing in her history. So I feel like the majority of it is kind of neutral, but then it's called Good Me Bad Me because the character has a good side and a bad side to her. She has a tendency to do bad things, she wants to do good things. The main character as well does tend to dwell on the negative characteristics of people, so a lot of the characters in here are very unlikable. She does idolize some of them, which goes into a psychological aspect again, but the majority of them she picks up on their negative points and she rarely ever discusses some of them positively. I do still think that this was a good book. I do think that it was well crafted. I understand the perspective that the author is coming from, and I do think it is an interesting, like I said, speculative, hypothetical look at what somebody who had these childhood conditions would behave like. But yeah, very mixed feelings about this. I gave it 3 stars, but I wouldn't necessarily not recommend it because I do think it's good. Okay, so those are all the books I have read in the second half of July. Hoping that this energy carries on through to August. I do have quite a chunky August TBR ahead of me. However, I did break down the pages and I've worked out that it's actually only 100 or so pages more than my average monthly page count. So fingers crossed I will be able to get through that stack. If I carry on reading like I have this month, then I will definitely get through that stack. But yeah, I'm just happy to be reading a lot again. So if you have read any of the books that I've mentioned in this video, then please let me know down in the comments what you thought of them. Aside from that, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, Twitter and Patreon if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you will go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.